Okay, thank you everybody for tuning in. As we all know, today is Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the 17th day of Tammuz, where we begin this period of the 3 weeks during which we will have continually accelerating strictness and the mood becoming darker until we reach Tisha B'Av and sit on the floor and commemorate the Korban Beit HaMikdash, the first and second Batei Mikdash. So I thought it was appropriate today. I want to talk a little bit about the subject at hand and some insights into what happened. Why was Yerushalayim destroyed? And the truth is that there are many, many opinions, which means that there's perhaps no one authoritative reason. It's, I would say, a combination of many, many factors. You see the Gemara in Baba Metzia, the Gemara in Yuma, talking about all the different breakdowns of society, Jewish society, in what was at one time really a pristine and unique commonwealth, that even when we had some of the greatest heroes of our time, nevertheless, there was ultimately this breakdown, whether it was because of a spiritual nature, maybe we didn't follow the mitzvot well enough, maybe it was because socially we didn't get along with each other. Many, many different reasons are given. Most of us are familiar with this famous Gemara in Yuma that talks about the fact that whereas the first Beit HaMikdash, the violation of the cardinal mitzvot of Judaism took place, of violence, immorality, even idolatry, and in the second Beit HaMikdash, it was, none of those were problematic. The people were at a much higher level in the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, which is kind of hard for us to understand. Usually, as we go through time, we get weaker, and at least spiritually weaker. But in any case, there the Gemara says it was a case of sinat chinam, hating for no reason at all, is the way it's usually translated. We're going today to try to come to a better understanding of what sinat chinam means. Maybe if we know what it means, we can work harder to cure it. And I wanted to take the time to share with you the classic Talmudic story about the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Some of you may have seen this before. I know I've given this talk on many occasions, but even if you heard it, it's very, very worthwhile to hear it again. It's a short story, unfortunately, not a very celebratory one. And our intrepid host, Yossi, is going to put the story on the screen. We're going to read through it, and then we're going to talk about it. And you certainly have the opportunity afterwards to put something in the chat, and I'm going to ask some questions about it. Okay, so basically, we're going to begin and look at, if you want to follow the actual Gemara, it's in the tractate of Gittin, Nun Hey, and we're going to start basically 3, 6, 9 lines from the bottom. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. The story begins with an introduction. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mai dichtiv ashrei adam mefached tamid. What is the meaning? This is a phrase that comes from Proverbs that says, happy is the person, and I see you have some translation of the art scroll there, so you can follow that too. I'm going to give you my my own running translation. So I may differ but with Art Scroll with Rabbi Art Scroll for a few words, but don't worry about that. So quoting this famous phrase from Proverbs, happy is the person that is always, here we use the word mefached, fearful, I would say, who is always very diligent and careful about what's going on around him. And somebody who hardens his heart is going to come to evil. That's kind of the introduction. We may at some point come back to it. And then the story begins also with an intro. Akamsa ubar kamsa charuv Yerushalayim. Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. We can skip the next little part. That's for another story. And then we begin at the end of the following line, repeating this kind of title to the story. Akamsa ubar kamsa charuv Yerushalayim. Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So I want you to bear that in mind. It's important that the title's in there and that it's repeated twice. Obviously, there's some emphasis. Let's see what the story's about. Dahu Gavra, there once was a man, Derachme Kamsa. He was friends with someone named Kamsa. Ubal Devave Bar Kamsa, and yet he was also an enemy or in a dispute. The literal words mean that he was in a dispute with someone named Bar Kamsa. Think of it, if you will, Goldberg and Goldberger, two very, very similar names. Avad Seudata, he made a party, a banquet. As we'll see, this is going to be a very large and I would say kind of a something that attracted all the rich and famous, so to speak, of Yerushalayim. He makes this banquet, Amar l'sham'eh, and says to his messenger, Zil aitele kamsa, go and bring kamsa to the party. Now, in those days, this was before social media, and if you wanted to get a message to somebody, you actually physically had to go either and bring them an invitation or perhaps even escort them. In this case, it seems that the host wants Kamsa escorted, and his messenger goes on the way. But unfortunately, he makes a mistake. He confuses the names, and instead of bringing Kamsa, he brings Bar Kamsa. Aitile Bar Kamsa. Ata ashkeche dahaviyativ. Well, Bar Kamsa comes in, sits down, and the host sees it. Amarle, and he looks out perhaps from across the room and sees Bar Kamsa there and says, Michte, let's see. Hahu Gavra, Bal Devava Dahu Gavra. This man is the enemy of that man. A very strange phrase, which we'll get to later. And then he reacts, and he goes up to Bar Kamsa and says, My boy Tacha, what in God's name are you doing here? You're not invited. You're not supposed to be here. Kum puk, get up and get out. Amarle, Bar Kamsa, stunned by this directive of the host, says to him, Hoel va'ate shavkin v'yahavnilach demei mad da'achil neveshatina. Since I'm already sitting here, please don't throw me out. It's going to be very embarrassing in front of everybody here at the banquet. I am willing and happy to pay for anything I eat and drink. We're on the next stop. Amarle lo. The host says, sorry, nothing doing. I want you out. Amarle, says Bar Kamsa, Yahavni lach demei palga d'seudatayich. I am willing to pay and give you half the cost of this banquet. Just don't embarrass me by throwing me out. Amarle lo. The host remains firm and he says, no, sorry. Amarle, so Bar Kamsa has his final offer. Yahavni lach demei kula seudatayich. I am willing to pay for the entire banquet as long as you let me stay. Amarle, at this point, the host is already pretty fed up, and he says, lo, No, nakte biyadei ve'ukme ve'afke. He says, I will actually lift you, literally lift you up and throw you out. You get the picture of in the old Western movies, somebody being thrown out of a saloon out into the street. And that's basically what happens to Bar Kamsa. However, he is not someone to trifle with. Amar, and he says perhaps to himself, since there were distinguished rabbis sitting here at this party, as we said, it must have been some very highfalutin party. Shmamina kanichalahu. Since they did nothing, it's apparent and it's clear to me that they approved of what this man did to me, throwing me out in such an unceremonious manner. So Bar Kamsa, he will not let it lie there. He has a plan. Azul ichabahu kurtza bimalcha. He goes and he basically says to the Caesar or the emperor, the Roman, you know, the Jews are planning an uprising against you. Amar le'lekeser mardubach Yehudai. He says they're going to revolt against the Caesar. Amar le, says Caesar, mi Omar. Who? How do you know that? Who told you that? Where'd you get that from? Amar le shadr lehu karbana. I have an idea, says Bar Kamsa. We can test whether or not the Jews are happy with you, are reverent to you, or whether they detest you and planning a rebellion. We'll see. You go and offer an offering in the Beit HaMikdash. Non-Jews were also able, especially the emperor, the governor, he can bring a carbon too, like anyone else. And says Bar Kamsa, let's see, ima karvin lei, if they will accept it or not. That will be a sign. Azul shada bidei egla talasa. He goes and he's got this all worked out. He selects a very fine calf, a prime animal that should be perfectly acceptable for offering, but then he does something to it. Bahari dekaate shada beimuma beniv sfatayim va'amrle bedukin sheba'ayin duchta. He makes a mark, a blemish, a cut in the animal, either in its lip or in its eye. We'll come back to this. This is significant too. Delididan havemuma. For those in the taking care of the Beit HaMikdash who are careful, this would definitely be a blemish and would invalidate the offering. However, lidideu lav mumahu, but to the naked eye, you wouldn't even see it, and nobody would think that there's any problem with this calf at all. Well, he has put the rabbinical establishment into a trap, and they're not sure what to do. So they call a meeting, as rabbis are wont to do. Savar Rabbanan likrove mishum shalom malchus. Some of the rabbis say, okay, it has a blemish, but listen, we're dealing with the Roman government here. We better not mess around. Let's just bring it as an offering anyway. Amr lahu Rabbi Zechariah ben Abkulis, stands up this individual, Rabbi Zechariah, and says, what? Yomru bali mumin krivin legabe mizbeach. You would have everybody think and see that and people say they brought a blemished animal as an offering on the mizbeach of the Beit HaMikdash. And in a sense, he freezes plan A. So they go to plan B, Savar lemiktalei, the lo lezel v'lema. Let's kill him. Let's just take care of Bar Kamsa and kill him and be rid of the problem. Well, up steps again Rabbi Zechariah and says, what? Kill him? Yomru matil mumba kadashim yarog? You would have people say that putting a blemish in an animal subjects you to the death penalty and freezes plan B as well. At this point, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan, An v'tanuto shel Rabbi Zachari ben Avkulas hachriva et beitenu b'sarfat hechalenu b'glitanu me'artzenu. The quote-unquote humility or modesty of this Rabbi Zachariah will cause our house, the house of God, the Beit HaMikdash, to be destroyed, to burn the sanctuary, and to cause us to be exiled from our land. And indeed, because the offering was not accepted, the Roman emperor accepts the fact and believes that indeed there is a rebellion afoot. And according to the story, we won't go through the rest of it, he is shown a secret way into Yerushalayim through the walls of the city, and the battle against Yerushalayim begins, which, as we know, ends with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. This is the story which the Gemara tells, and it's a very potent one. We can take that off the screen. Thank you very much, Yossi. And I want to start by seeing if we can identify who is the villain in this story. And I suggest to you that there actually are 6 different possibilities. So if you want to write in the chat and see if you can identify who might the 6 possible culprits be who caused this scene and ultimately led to the destruction of Yerushalayim. So let me go through them. If somebody else wants to add, you can do it along the way. The first person that I think we would name would be the host of the party. He is the one who starts it all off by unceremoniously, evicting Bar Kamsa from the party. So he would be number 1. I think number 2 would be Bar Kamsa. After all, he is the one who takes this so badly and is so insulted that he will turn the Roman emperor against the city, against the people, against the Beit HaMikdash, and lead to its direct destruction. There are some others who I could name as well. Some people want to say maybe the messenger is at fault. He's perhaps a bit of a shlemiel or a shlemazel. He gets it wrong. If he would have gotten it right and brought Kamsa to the party, maybe none of this would have happened. Another possibility, clearly, and the Rabbi Yochanan stands up and says that maybe the culprit is Rabbi Zachariah. He's the one who shoots down plan A and plan B. And Rabbi Yochanan says, you're the one who's at fault. The 5th possibility, and this seems clear from the story as well, who does Bar Kamsa blame? Bar Kamsa blames the rabbis. When all else fails, blame the rabbi. That's the usual go-to in the Jewish community. But here we see Bar Kamsa says the rabbis are sitting there. They see what happens. They do nothing. They're the ones who are to blame. And then there's one more person. How did we begin this story? Twice. Repeating the title. Akamsa ubar Kamsa charva Yerushalayim. The city of Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. And when you think about this, you wonder immediately, why are we blaming Kamsa? He never even showed up. He maybe even didn't know there was a party. He never got his invitation. And can you imagine that for the rest of history, he's reading this, or his descendants are reading this and saying, I wasn't even there, and yet I am being blamed. The title of the story is Kamsa and Bar Kamsa Destroy Jerusalem. The other question, that's a question, we have to answer it. And the other question, of course, is several of these people are named. Bar Kamsa is named, Rabbi Zachariah is named, you see Rabbi Yochanan is in there and he's named. But why is the host not named? If he really is at fault, and I would say whenever I talk about this story, the number one person who is given the blame is the host. It starts with him. And yet we don't know his name. Why not? We're naming other names. We should name him as well. So I want to try to put all this together and see if we can make some sense of it. It seems, and it kind of hangs on one statement here that's very difficult to understand. When the host looks out in the crowd and sees Bar Kamsa, he gives a very cryptic statement. He says, Michdei, let's see. It's an unusual word. Hahu Gavra, he says, sorry, Michte, let's see, Ahu Gavra Bal Devaba Dahu Gavra. This man is the enemy of that man. Why does he say that? Why doesn't he say he's my enemy? That's the implication. He throws Bar Kamsa out. It seems clear that that's his enemy, but he doesn't say that. He says this man, meaning Bar Kamsa, is the enemy of that man, meaning Kamsa. This all begins, and we're starting to understand what is the climate of Jerusalem, that the host of this lavish party sees someone and says, he's not necessarily my enemy, but he is the enemy of my friend. And if he's the enemy of my friend, he's automatically my enemy. I can't allow him to be here. What happens if my friend Kamsa hears that I hosted his enemy at my party? And so he throws him out. Why is his name not given? Because apparently it doesn't matter what his name is. The Gemara is trying to show us and tell us that the situation has gotten so bad, this element of sinat chinam, of hating people for no reason at all, causes everyone to take sides. You don't have a personal vendetta, or you don't have any kind of grudge against someone who never harmed you, but yet you have to react viciously and throw him out of the party. And this is why, although Kamsa isn't there, this story is reflecting that there must have been a major battle royale between these two prominent figures, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, that sucked everybody else into the fight and into the machloket. And so even though Kamsa is not there, he's also to blame for being at the root of this vicious and seemingly insoluble battle between people that affects the whole community. The word Kamsa is interesting. Number one, it doesn't have to be their actual name. The Gemara often uses nicknames for people, and the nicknames are themselves very instructive. You know what kamsa means? A kametz is a fist. We have an offering where you take a fistful of flour, and whatever's in your fist, that's the amount you need for the offering. But the word has come to mean, when we say a kamtzan, that means someone who is cheap or tight-fisted, as if they hold the coin in their fist and won't let it go. Well, here we're not talking about a coin, but we're talking about holding onto something else with a fist. And that, of course, is some kind of argument in society, symbolized by the fist, almost like a black power, people indicating, I'm prepared to use violence against you, but I'm holding on to it tight-fisted. I won't let go, and I'm determined to bring everybody else into this argument until I win. The fact that we say kamsa and bar kamsa, the word bar we know, as in bar mitzvah, means son. It may be very well possible that we're talking about even a father and a son who are having this major dispute, and they will not relent. And it is so bad that, in a sense, God sees it and says, I can't continue with a community and a society where everybody is at each other's throat, and allows the Romans to use this as an excuse to destroy Yerushalayim. Remember that the Romans, they're not heroes, they're villains, but they're not the villain here. Because, as we've often said, if we do what we need to do, we don't have to worry about anybody else being more powerful than we are. Nobody imposes upon the Jewish people. We create our own destiny. And the Gemara is trying to tell us Yerushalayim was not destroyed because the Romans wanted to subjugate us or to crush our independence. It was destroyed because the society broke down, because everybody was out to get everybody else. And that's the sinat chinam that the Gemara is trying to demonstrate with a story, and to say that when people reach the point where, even if they don't have any personal grudge against someone else, but yet they have to take sides, that's sinat chinam. That's baseless, causeless hatred that has to be eradicated, because it can destroy an entire society. Where you have an argument where two people are arguing philosophically or legally, well, that goes on everywhere, every day, in every society, and that's fine. People are going to differ, but not where they're going to reach a point where the entire community is polarized and everyone against somebody. That, says Hashem, no, that can't last. And that's why we put this story symbolically in Gittin, in the Masechta, the Gemara that talks about divorce. And this is God saying, in a sense, unfortunately, if there are really irreconcilable differences between you, then there have to be irreconcilable differences between me and you. If you yourselves can't get along, then I can't be a part of that either. And in a sense, God seeks, as it were, a kind of divorce. God never really divorces us, but he sometimes can distance himself from us. Let's say a separation, if not a divorce. We'll always have Hashem as our partner and as our mate. But here, symbolically, Hashem is saying, if you can't get along with each other, then I can't be a part of that anymore. So when we think about our trying to solve the issue, the Gemara says, and this was kind of the answer to the question when I posed for the title, who actually destroyed Yerushalayim? The Gemara says, if you are in a generation where the Beit HaMikdash is not rebuilt, it's as if you destroyed it. Obviously, we weren't there. We didn't live in the time of the Babylonians and the Romans, but the wise rabbis of the Gemara are saying that you have to find the cure. If you're not solving the problem, you're perpetuating the problem. And especially in what this story indicates, if you can't come together, if you can't find common ground, if you are one pitched battle, one side against the other, and sucking everybody else into that, then there's something wrong. You can have legitimate grievances. You can certainly fight for what you consider to be justice, but there has to be, at least at some level, a camaraderie and a unity and if you will, a love and respect for everybody else at some level. And when Bar Kamsa is thrown out of the party, in a sense, that already is an indication that they've crossed the line. I want to just add one more thought about this kind of mysterious Rabbi Zachariah, who comes and shoots down the two plans. And he does it by saying, not it's a bad plan to offer a blemished animal. It's a bad plan to kill Bar Kamsa. What does he say? Yomru. What will people say? That's the language of the Gemara, says Rabbi Zachariah. What will people say if we do it? And this is an indication of the lack of leadership. The Gemara will go on to say, and I'm giving you kind of the bottom line, that of all the people who bear some guilt, it is truly the rabbis who have the most blame in this very sad story, because they're meant to be the spiritual leaders, the moral leaders, the ones who are going to show the community how to get closer to God and what God's moral level is. And they fail. And they fail because Rabbi Zachariah says he's worried, what will people think? When you have to lead, you cannot always look over your shoulder. You have to look ahead, and you have to see the future, and you have to find plot a course that takes you forward, and you can't always turn your head around. That's maybe where the stiff-neckedness of the Jewish people come from, and it's not always a good thing. And so at the end of the day, it's really the leaders who they have to be the ones to show the way. Everybody has to do their share. The messenger has to deliver the letter to the right person, and the host has to be hospitable to other people, even if they don't have an invitation. And you don't go and inform on your fellow Jew and your fellow human being and get them into trouble. Everybody shares something, some blame. But the primary blame are in those who have to take a leadership position. And that's what is missing. And that's what this story is saying. You're going to have people in a position of leadership who are able to tell you what you're doing wrong and say to you that you have to behave in a way that promotes friendship and promotes unity and promotes love between people and not splits people apart. And I think all of us, in a sense, have to do our share and have to, as the Gemara says, we're all, in a sense, culpable, because we're also not causing this generation to rebuild and ultimately to create a society where Yerushalayim, where the Beit HaMikdash deserves to be rebuilt. So it's a moral lesson for all of us. We have to, in our own way and in our own community and family and part of society, we have to take a leadership role and say the right thing and do the right thing. But we also have to demand that we have good leaders. And that's sometimes up to us as well. We get the leaders that we deserve. You've heard that before, and it's very true. I see the question here from Gila. Well, there are Kohanim, but the rabbis ultimately, they're the ones that have the final decision, the Sanhedrin. They are the supreme Jewish court. So yes, the Kohanim administer, but questions of Jewish law will ultimately be decided by the Sanhedrin. We don't have a Sanhedrin today, but we have to make sure that we have the right rabbinic leaders and political leaders who are taking us in the right direction. So thank you all for joining in. Thanks, Yossi, for sharing the story. It's a very powerful story, and the Gemara chose it in order to give us something to think about for these next 3 weeks, and especially on Tisha B'Av. If anybody else has a comment, feel free to unmute and say it. I'm happy to listen. Okay, I thought somebody there, Deb, wanted to say something. If not, we will be back next week, and we'll be taking a break for part of the summer, but next week we will be back. An interesting talk about raising children and grandchildren from a couple of very fascinating stories and laws in the Torah. Shabbat shalom to everybody. Hope if you're fasting, you're having a good, meaningful, easy fast, and you're getting in shape for Tisha B'Av. And here it will be over in about an hour and 40 minutes. So we're almost there. So
Shabbat
we're
shalom.
wishing, Shabbat shalom, wishing everybody well.
Shabbat shalom.
See you next time.
Shabbat shalom.